At this point, we'll start recording the presentation for this month's January webinar, Your Hour with APA Virginia, sponsored by the Berkeley Group. This month, we will be hearing from Nathan George of RK&K regarding bicycle planning and design. These webinars that we do monthly, the fourth Monday of every month from noon to 1 o'clock, would not be possible without our generous sponsorship by the Berkeley Group, so we thank them. We also want to make sure that everybody, again, knows that this is a monthly webinar. We do this the fourth Monday, again, of every month. Below in your chat box, I sent the link to the February webinar registration called Plan for Health. You can read a little bit more about the description in that link and our presenters. I encourage you to do that, share it with your colleagues. Also, all of these webinars, after they're completed, are posted within 24 hours to our YouTube channel. I have also posted that link in the chat box below, so you can find all of the previous webinars, all of which have been submitted for continuing education credits. And if you have any questions about those, please let us know and we can get you more information on those. Again, thank you to the Berkeley Group. I'm going to hand this over to Nathan in just 1 second, but wanted to let you all know that Nathan will be presenting for about 50 minutes, and then there will be some opportunities for questions at the end. Also, his presentation is available in your handouts tab. That can be downloaded. At the end, when questions are available, you can either click the raise your hand button on your control panel that will alert us at the end of the presentation of who has questions, or you can type a question in your question box and those will be answered at the end as well. But thank you all for participating, and Nathan, I'm going to hand it over to you at this point.
Thank you, Martina. We are here to talk about bicycle planning and design, give you some perspectives for urban planners. Wanted to also thank the Berkeley Group. I apologize 1 second. Also wanted to give our thanks to the Berkeley Group for sponsoring today's webinar. To give you a little introduction, my name is Nathan George. I'm a planner, work with RK&K, bicycle and pedestrian team leader, and I work in our design group and municipal services group, providing design services for bicycle pedestrian related infrastructure. RK&K is a full-service consulting firm with about 1,200 employees in the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast states. So my practice is predominantly in the District, Maryland, Virginia, and we also have some work in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. So I'll be presenting some examples of projects that we've worked on over the last handful of years, and hopefully that'll give some good insights to the practice. So our work, again, we're a full-service firm, so we do all the services that a traditional bicycle planning and design firm would do, trails and cycle tracks. We also have, traditional practice in the civil engineering fields. We do streetscape work, ADA improvements, bridges, and then heavy civil as well. So that gives us a good perspective, a broad understanding of what it takes to develop a project from concept through to design and construction, and then ultimately opening it up for the road users to go out and ride on these new facilities. So today I put together an agenda where we'll go over some general considerations, what we're looking at as we're planning and designing these bike facilities. We'll discuss some of the trends as we're planning for cyclists. Then we'll go through some design guidance and some examples so we can discuss lessons learned. And then I'll highlight several keys to success that, from my own personal experience, wanted to share with you today, so you can reflect on those in your practice wherever you may be throughout the Commonwealth. So first we'll talk about some general considerations. The relevance of this topic is, it can't be overstated. Bike planning is an incredibly popular area of practice. It's one of the areas where we see a lot of interest in design. We're not building as many roads. We are building more trails, cycle tracks, and so forth. So those facilities provide for general interests of our community. So active transportation, alternatives, So these facilities allow us to enhance transit, expand the reach that transit is serving our communities. It provides environmental benefits because it is an alternative for transportation. So people might decide they're not going to take their car, but they'll go out in a bike. We're also talking a lot about safety. It's an issue that a lot of people today are concerned about, the trends that we're seeing in terms of bicyclists and pedestrians being struck, killed, seriously injured on our roads. So safety is a topic that is central to the practice as we're planning and designing these facilities. Bike planning is also essential, or it's a central theme in terms of accessibility. We're creating opportunities for people to go out and access their communities. And then cycling, it's a community or a cultural sort of approach. We see people who they want to go out and ride their bikes. It becomes a sense of community in and of itself. What I like to say is that cycling is awesome. I love my job because we're creating facilities that people can get out and go and enjoy the roads, go and enjoy a trail. It's just a fabulous way to spend an afternoon, enjoy a sunny day. So I'm really happy with the work that we get to do, and I'll get to show you some of those projects as we go through the presentation. Who are we? So I've given presentations like this to a number of different audiences. For the sake of this presentation, I wanted to just define who I expect I'll be speaking with. This is APA Virginia. So I assume most of us are planners. We may also have some engineers. There might be people like myself who are a plan engineer, kind of a hybrid of the two. And then in terms of the groups that generally are interested in these topics, it's consultants. I'm a consultant. We may have some government staff, design specialists who work in either of those groups, and there could even be some vendors. So just in terms of the point of view for today's presentation, these are the folks who I expect we're speaking with today. Why is this topic important to us? As we're planning and designing these facilities, it's important that we think about where we're going to build, and we also think about what we're going to build and how we're going to build it. At the end of the day, that really boils down to what's the bottom line. How are we going to finance these projects? Because despite having the best plans and knowing exactly what we're going to build, we do have to make sure that there's adequate money to construct these facilities and then ultimately to maintain those. So we'll cover some aspects of this throughout the presentation. Who's our audience? Who are we working to serve? So that's a variety of folks. We know that our direct impact is going to be the cyclists who are out there riding on these facilities. But there are also indirect impacts, and we need to keep that in mind as we're working on bike projects. So that includes property owners, the people who may be impacted because a new facility is located adjacent to or on their property if we need right-of-way. We've also got road users who are going to be around these cyclists, so we need to keep their expectations in mind. There are businesses, so these facilities may serve businesses. They may provide accessibility so people can go out and shop at businesses or even commute to an office. And then another consideration is tourism. Cycle tourism is a field that we recognize a lot of folks practice, and it's emerging as an area of interest to capture cyclists in your community. And then one area that I focus on a lot is children. So our audience isn't just the guys who are out riding in the street. We also need to keep in mind that there is demand, children, the elderly. We have a variety of users who are going to go out and use these facilities. So as we're thinking about who they're going to serve, we want to make sure that we capture all of those users, make sure that we define the expectations, and provide a facility that meets everybody's needs, the users, the general public, and then as communities, we're the owners of those facilities as well. So we're thinking about all of those folks as we're planning and designing these facilities. So as we're thinking about cycling, there are several different uses in terms of cycling. We've got the transportation, which is more or less your general, I want to get to and from point A to point B. So we have those transportation facilities that are a bit more direct. We've also got recreational facilities that serve for folks who are going out for a Saturday afternoon ride. But the facilities, whether transportation or recreational, may serve a combination of benefits. So it's really important to think about who are you trying to serve as you're planning a new facility. Is it going to serve a transportation purpose where it's more direct? Is it recreational where it may just be for somebody to go out and enjoy? Or is it do we need to make sure that we meet those combined needs? So that's something to keep in mind. Now, in terms of mode share, we know from recent research that roughly half of our bike trips are recreational. That number has been decreasing a little bit over the last 10 years or so. And we see that commute trips are a small percentage of our overall cycling trips, but that number has been growing. And we can also see in terms of the increases in cycling that it's becoming more utilitarian. So people are getting on their bikes so they can ride to shop or go to do something other than just a recreational purpose, commuting to work, shopping, visiting businesses, that sort of thing. So as people are out there biking more, we're trying to meet their needs, get them where they need to go. Everybody's probably seen this example or some iteration of it over the past handful of years, the various types of cyclists. So the key aspect as we're looking at the types of cyclists is the percentages, the breakdown in how these user groups are out on the road. So we've got these small percentage of folks who are strong and fearless. They're on any road, any condition, regardless of speed or facility type. They're going to be out on the roads because they've chosen to be there. Then you've got the enthusiastic, confident rider who they're generally also going to be out on the roads. They're generally going to ride regardless of conditions. They may be a little bit more apprehensive about the most challenging environments, but they're still going to be out on the road. They make up a small percentage, less than 10% of our overall bike users. And for the past, as long as we have been designing and planning facilities, that's the group that's generally been catered to from the engineering perspective. But now we've recognized that there's this group of interested and concerned people, the folks who want to be out there, but maybe they are a little more apprehensive. They want to have a dedicated facility. They want to have some protected infrastructure. They make up the roughly 2/3 of our audience, the people who we might see out on our roads. So it's important to keep in mind that we have a vast majority of people are willing to ride, but more than half of them want to see a good, safe facility. And then there are about 1/3 of folks who are no way, no how. They're just not going to get on the back of a bike, so we're not going to see them out there. But we do recognize that those people also are representative of our population. So the challenge for us as planners, bike projects are not going to address every obstacle. We can't make every condition adequate for the folks who aren't as comfortable. And we have to keep in mind some of these challenges as we're bringing projects to our plans, to a bike master plan or to our CIP. We have limited budgets. There are limitations in our right-of-way or our space. We've got competing interests. There are land use barriers. We're working a lot of times in inner suburbs or where we've got existing residential subdivisions. So there are a lot of complications due to land use. There are environmental barriers. We hear a lot from our clients that none of this work tends to be easy. It tends to be really challenging, and environmental tends to be one of those areas. So that is a barrier that almost every project has to overcome. And then there is a slightly tougher regulatory environment that we work under today. So we'll touch on all of these aspects as we get into the presentation. And the example here is a road that's on the south side of Richmond where the planned facility is a shared use path, but you can see the path that's there today in front of these homes is very narrow, and there are some obstacles to installing that facility. So just some of the challenges as we bring these projects up that we have to think through and work through. So what are our goals? We're trying to improve transportation opportunities, connect communities, improve safety. Addressing public health is an area that's become a much bigger point of discussion. People want to be active. They want to get out and ride and exercise. It's very important to people that they can actually do something as opposed to just riding around in a car. So that's a really big goal, is to improve opportunities for public health. We're also maybe trying to attract new business. So cycle facilities certainly have the opportunity and have demonstrated that trails can spawn trail towns. So we may be attracting new business to a small rural town. And we're also satisfying a public need. So there's a ton of interest in building new cycling facilities in our communities. And so that is a major goal, is to provide what our communities, what the citizens around where we live are asking for. So we're going to go through some trends in planning for cyclists. First step is to have a plan, and I'm sure most of the communities that we are talking about have a plan. In general, most communities, I would say, have a plan that we are working with. There are a handful that don't, but generally speaking, we've got plans. The key thing to talk about here, what's most important, is what that plan does for us. So we're documenting where we're going to be putting these facilities. That memorializes our transportation plan. We're identifying the alignments that are the priorities. This is where we see the need to put in a new bike facility. And the bike plan may also allow us to prioritize our projects. So the example here from Norfolk, it includes a number of alignments and where those alignments could be developed. So having that plan helps Norfolk determine what it is they're going to build. They can use the plan to prioritize when projects should move forward. So those are critical considerations, and we'll touch on this a little bit more just a bit. Another important theme that we're discussing a lot in the bike planning community is connected networks. So we all recognize that these lines on our master plans don't just build themselves. So we have these segments that are existing, but we've got a lot of pieces that the pieces of the puzzle don't connect. And so what we're seeing is, what we say essentially when we're developing these plans, it's like we're saying to our cyclists when they're going from an existing facility to another and it's connected by a dashed line, that's like saying good luck. But the goal is that we fill in these gaps, and we want to prioritize those missing links to make it easier for people to connect their route, to make it safer. The example here from Harrisonburg, as far as I could tell, these bike lanes that I've circled have been constructed. So now if you want to ride from one point to other along those two solid lines, the dashed line in between has been connected. So that's a theme that we're not trying to have little bits and pieces that are disconnected throughout our communities. We want to actually create a network. We're seeing that in some communities where they come into a downtown and they do 5 or 6 projects on a network basis, and those projects are on the ground all at the same time. So connected networks is a big theme that we're hearing. Another area that folks are talking about is low stress facilities. So we're looking at stress mapping. What are the roads that somebody might ride along? What are the lane widths? How fast is traffic? What's the speed? Are there a number of lanes? Is a multi-lane highway versus a 2-lane? Are there shoulders? Is there a side path? So all of those factors are put into a mapping tool, and then a cyclist can look at that map and say, well, I think I might ride along these lower stress routes and avoid an area that's a clear conflict. The example here in Montgomery County, Maryland, they have a county level stress map. We'll be talking about this Glenbrook Road segment in a little bit. But just to give you guys an idea, we're looking in terms of where the stress is highest from a planning perspective, so we can go in and try and fix that. So in terms of a planning tool for Montgomery County, we're trying to use this as a tool to prioritize our projects. So we're not only creating that connected network, but we're also maybe fixing some of the high stress areas. Another theme that we hear a lot about is safety and security, and if you've worked on bike projects, you've definitely heard that concern raised at some point. Some considerations that we hear about: lighting. Lighting is a big issue in terms of security. We want to make sure that you can see at night. It makes it more accessible. It's more of a transportation type of component of a project. So whenever we're doing a transportation bike facility, we're looking at including lighting. It is a very expensive facility, so that is a consideration that you have to have as you're planning that facility to include lighting and be a 24/7 transportation link. Other factors that people might look at are cameras, maybe some patrols, either police or volunteer, and then including mile markers is one that's it's a very valuable tool to riders because it allows them to identify their location if they need to call in the event of an emergency. It also might make a good meeting point for people as they're out on the trail to say, I'll meet you at mile marker 50, and so it's another good asset to include. One of the big themes that we're seeing is intersection safety, and we're seeing this theme because of the complications that we're seeing on our roads, the demonstrated safety challenges for people to get around the existing road network. So the example that I show here on the left is a pedestrian example, but it's applicable to bikes as well. As speeds increase, the ability for a vulnerable user like a bicyclist or pedestrian to survive a crash, it decreases as those cars are moving faster. So our goal is anywhere that we are intersecting with an existing road, we want to make sure that we identify that point, make sure that people see what is going on from the car, and identify that the bicyclist is going to be crossing the street, hopefully with some sort of an active warning device, but at minimum with signage and marking, so we can improve safety at that intersection, decrease the likelihood of a collision, and then anything we can do to reduce speeds at those points will also decrease the likelihood that they'll be severely injured in the event that a collision should occur. So I want to cover a little bit of design guidance. Hopefully everybody on today's webinar is familiar with these examples, but we'll cover some of the more emerging guidance and talk about the context that we look at it as designers. And then we'll also go through some examples so I can kind of touch on some lessons learned and highlight some of the challenges and opportunities that we see on our projects. So first is the design guidelines and standards that we work with as a baseline. So whenever I'm working in any locality, I'm looking at the community, state level, or locality level, what's their bicycle plan. So in the state of Virginia, we have the state bicycle policy plan that's shown on the left. In your communities, that would include your bike master plan or bike ped master plan. So that's first and foremost. We want to make sure that we have the most relevant guidelines for the location where we're working. Then in terms of general guidelines, we have our federal guidelines that everybody's familiar with. Some people hate some of the standards that are in here. I won't get into too many of those details, but just to highlight what we look at in terms of engineering these facilities. So the Green Book policy on geometric design of highways and streets, that is an overview of design of roads, and it also includes some bike facility guidelines, but the more specific AASHTO guidance is in the Guide for Development of Bicycle Facilities 2012, or the 4th edition. So these two documents are our federal guidelines on things like alignment and grade, how we treat intersections from a very general perspective. The newer guide, the 5th edition, is supposed to be upcoming. It's currently being developed. So we should see some better guidelines, but in general, what we see with these two documents is that they're very, they provide a framework, but they're not very specific. They're guidance documents. But certain jurisdictions, certain engineers look at them as they are the book to go to. So that's something just to keep in mind, that these are what's considered to be the standard guidance documents. And then, of course, the manual on uniform traffic control devices that outlines things like pavement marking, signage, signalization. We have to keep in mind that we're working within the framework of these 3 documents whenever we're developing design for a project. But there are more recent guidelines, much better research that's coming out. So just to highlight a handful of those for you, FHWA, USDOT, they've come out with a lot of interesting research documents. So incorporating on-road bicycle networks into resurfacing projects, that's a great opportunity to introduce bike facilities without doing a really expensive bike project. So that was a really handy tool that they put out last year. They also developed the separated bike lane planning and design guide. It has really good examples that we can use and draw from in terms of how these facilities should look, not in the bits and pieces that we see in the old federal standards, but now in a document that presents them on a corridor or intersection level basis. NACTO, the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, and some of their subsequent publications really was a big, it really generated a lot of demand for these new guidelines. So NACTO is certainly a book that comes off the shelf anytime we start working on a project, because that was where a lot of this more innovative treatment came about, was when they started publishing several years ago. Then we've got some more recent guidance and research that's come out. It's the Separated Bike Lane Planning and Design Guide that Massachusetts DOT put out that has some really great examples for how to reduce traffic stress, very great pictorial references. So that's a guide that is not, while it's not necessarily applicable to every project, it may provide some good guidance that may spark some innovative ideas while you're working on a design. Just recently at TRB, another USDOT Federal Highways publication, the Small Town and Rural Multimodal Networks Guide, came out. That was a it applies a lot of the same guidance that we see, but in a rural context. So it has some really good ideas and guidance for how to put these facilities together in a context that's not a downtown, but maybe, you know, a greenway or a more rural setting. So again, we're continuing to see a lot more guidance come out that builds on the practice and provides great pictures and descriptions of how we might put together these facilities, but in the context that we may be doing our designs. So if you are in a rural community, I'd highly suggest you get a copy of that guidance. Just to give everybody an idea of what these guides look like, so the newer guidance, again, is visual. It provides context. It doesn't just show a facility like a bike lane approaching an intersection. It shows the intersection. It has signage and the people. So what you're going to see as you look through these guides is a much better representation of what those facilities are going to look like when they're constructed. It's also going to provide you with an overview of how different facility types might interface. So when we use the old federal guidelines, we'd have to put together that information based on our own experience, engineering judgment, and we would also have to piece together different components of the design throughout the guides. Now we have guides that show how different facilities might interface with each other on an intersection or corridor basis. So again, these are really great guides to help us depict that information, pick apart how we might complete a design, and you can even see some differences, like whether they use dashed green paint versus a solid green paint from left to right. So there are variations that we might apply as we're completing a design. A really helpful reference that was put together a couple of years ago is by the PedBike Info Center is this facility reference matrix. I've included the URL at the bottom. If you download the presentation, you should be able to click on that and bring it up. This reference matrix allows you to identify a facility type that you might be trying to design, like a contraflow bike lane, and then you can go through all these publications and see which page and in what publication that treatment is referenced. So if you're reviewing a plan, if you're developing a plan, whichever you may be trying to do, this is a good thing to have on your desk that you can quickly flip to the pages that are relevant to whatever facility type. Make sure it's being designed appropriately. Make sure nothing's missing. The only caveat that I'll add is that this hasn't been updated recently, and there are some more recent guidelines that have been put out. So you still will have to do a little digging through the index if you're referencing one of the newer manuals, and hopefully there's a plan to update this matrix at some point to incorporate those more recent guidelines. One of the themes that I did want to highlight is FHWA support for design flexibility. So we discussed these federal guidelines and standards, and then we have all this new and emerging guidance that's come out. So this memorandum that was published in 2013 essentially said, yes, we acknowledge that AASHTO is the standard. It's what we use as our primary reference, and the same for MUTCD. But designers should reference NACTO, they should reference ITE, and these other guides that have come out. So essentially what we're saying is, as a designer, as you're working on a new project, you shouldn't say, well, I can't use this facility type because it's not in the MUTCD. You need to reference the MUTCD and look at the other guidelines and see how they all fit together, so you can incorporate different elements of design that may not be clearly spelled out in the federal guidelines but are allowable. So it allows us essentially as designers to say, yes, NACTO is applicable, and here's how it fits into the overall design practice. There are some caveats to that, but in general, it just allows us to be a bit more robust with our research as we're putting together a design. I want to highlight two common types of bike projects as we get into the examples. So just for the sake of simplification, I broke this out into two types: the retrofit resurfacing type projects, and then also full facility design. The examples that I have up here, both were located within the existing road section. On the left, we just did a resurfacing project, and that included bike lanes. On the right, we introduced a cycle track and took out a travel lane. So there are some challenges and opportunities with both, and in a full facility design, you may actually be constructing. But the theme here is that a retrofit means we're pretty much just using the existing road, where the full facility design means we're building something new with concrete, asphalt, that sort of thing. So some of the challenges to those projects. In a retrofit project, we have competing interests between modes, so we're not building anything new. That may make it a little bit challenging to fit everything into the existing palette, if you will. We have conflict points that we may not be able to work out because we can't create new space. Typical challenge on any bike project is parking, and if you've worked in bike design at all, you'll definitely run across that issue. And then generally on a retrofit basis, there's going to be higher traffic stress, so we don't often have a lot of space to make for these new facilities. On the full facility design side, challenges that are pretty common: utilities, right-of-way, challenging environments, and then we are now required to do stormwater management. All of these generally trickle down to cost. When you're building things new, the cost is generally going to be significantly higher. And then common challenges between the two: traffic safety, we want to make these facilities as safe as possible, and public support. So as we have some competing interests, we may run into a little bit of public opposition. We want to make sure that our design satisfies every user's needs and provides the maximum safety and benefit to our communities. So to highlight some of the challenges, one example is that I mentioned already is competing interests. So here's an example from my ride into the office here in DC, where a project included bike lanes, parking, and 2 travel lanes, but when we get to an intersection where there's a turn lane, there wasn't space to put in a dedicated facility. And so in that case, we've got this turn lane, or is it a bike lane, or is it both? And this is the sort of environment where it's fine for someone who's in that strong, enthusiastic, confident rider type, but it may not capture the users who are a little less confident, who may, at this point, prefer to ride up onto the sidewalk to avoid being out mixing with traffic. And a lot of factors weigh into that. Traffic volumes, speeds, and maybe even the character of the other road users. Is it heavy trucks and buses, or are they passenger cars? So a lot of factors to consider there. We do know how to fix that in terms of cost. It costs more to go in and do the retrofit to physically separate, but just a little guidance to highlight here from the MassDOT separated bike lane planning design guide. We know the exposure level is high when we just have bikers out there on their own, and as we incrementally include means to separate folks, flex posts and curb separated bike lanes and trails, we reduce their exposure, which ultimately improves safety. So it's a balancing act of making sure that we strike the right balance to improve the facility, make it safe, and use the space the best that we can. Another challenge that's very common on projects, especially when we're working outside the roadway, is right-of-way and utilities. This example comes from Montgomery County. So we may do some engineering to limit our impacts beyond the right-of-way. So we might have to build some walls. It's pretty common when we're doing trail projects. In this example, no buffer was provided, which is an AASHTO minimum for a buffer is 5 feet. So balancing the demands of traffic along with the demands of the cyclist, that can be tough, and sometimes we're doing a design waiver or a design exception that removes some of those features we'd prefer to include. We've also got utility conflicts, might be utility poles like this example. A lot of times they're underground conflicts, so we just have to keep those in mind. Environmental barriers. So this is the Anacostia Riverwalk Trail in Washington, D.C. In this case, we were working with National Park Service, and it was determined that the best location for this trail was to go out into the river on an elevated boardwalk. So that created with it some floodplain and environmental issues. We also had this bridge, CSX bridge, that we needed to design under. So you have to go through a lot of hoops to make these environmental challenges work the way they're supposed to. Building out in the river is definitely a challenging environment, but this was a critical link that it was determined the best location was to go through the river, is most direct, and it ended up being a really great facility. Balancing access. So we constantly hear the challenges about people not wanting drivers to enter these bike facilities. So there were bollards put up at this example of Virginia Capitol Trail just outside of downtown Richmond. That's something that I generally discourage. I don't want to try and prohibit cars from entering the path because they don't belong there, and these bollards create a safety challenge for cyclists. So just something to keep in mind. But the bigger challenge is where these intersections occur along a trail or a bike route. In this case, we've got an entrance that's stop controlled for the cyclist, so that prioritizes cars entering and exiting an entrance. A lot of times when we're at driveways, the cyclist can continue through. So the more driveways we have, the more conflicts they may have with turning vehicles. So the more access points we have along a bike facility, that creates a lot more challenges and potential conflicts. And in a lot of cases, as we're planning, this may influence the decision to construct a facility on one side of the road or the other based on driveway densities or commercial entrances, even intersecting roadways. So balancing access is incredibly important. And another challenge is maintenance. So we know that as we build these facilities, there are going to be things out there that we need to address. So debris, leaf removal in the fall. In the winter, we've got snow, and there will be people who are out riding in the winter. We also may have temporary closures, especially if we're talking about on-road facilities. So making sure that your community has standards in place that require a bike detour or some sort of notification when there's a temporary closure of the bike facility. It's pretty important that people are adequately accommodated through work zones. And then just in terms of long-term maintenance. So if we put these facilities out there just like any road, they break down over time. If we maintain them, they're going to last longer. But if we don't maintain them, the cost to go in and do repairs will be higher. So those are all considerations that we want to make sure are addressed from an operational perspective. So to highlight some facilities, and we'll go through these pretty quickly, but just some of the facilities that we're working on. So side paths, shared use paths, these are our facilities that provide the greatest separation. Talking again about the challenges that we see. So here, the example on the left, we've got a narrow buffer. We couldn't do the full 5-foot buffer there. So ideally, that would be a little wider. The example on the right shows that we have a lot of environmental drainage considerations, a small bridge. So those increase cost and complexity of the project, just some considerations that we see a lot on those types of projects. Trails, again here, highlighting the Anacostia Riverwalk Trail. These projects, we use the AASHTO guides to look at things like horizontal and vertical alignments, want to make sure that the sight lines are adequate, sign when they're not. So those guidelines are very applicable when we're talking about these sorts of greenway facilities, making sure that people can safely traverse that facility type. And then as we get into on-street facilities, buffered bike lanes, so we've got a standard buffer, maybe 2 to 3 feet. It is a huge benefit to separate folks from traveling vehicles. Some of the disadvantages here are that cars tend to use bike lanes, and if you add the buffer, it's essentially a travel lane. So there are challenges there that if no physical separation is provided, people are going to tend to use that space, create more conflicts with cyclists when they're on the road. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're looking at different facility types. This example is in Charlottesville, Virginia. So if we're working on that same context where we're building within the existing roadway, we put in the buffer, but we want to enhance that separation, we'll look at using other devices. And the case here, we propose flex posts. This is currently in design. In a project like this, one of the key considerations that we had, it was snow maintenance. So one-way paired cycle tracks on this road, they're too narrow to do snow removal, but the flex posts that we specified are removable. So this facility is actually a buffered bike lane in the winter, allowing the snowplow to clear curb to curb, and then the flex post would go back in the spring and be there spring through fall for the less confident riders, which sort of matches when we'd expect those users to be out on the road. And then taking it a step further, curb separated bike lanes. So here we've got a section of the Virginia Capitol Trail where it's curb separated along the roadway. This is an interim alignment to detour an issue that we had acquiring right-of-way to go through a property along the river. So in this case, a curb separated bike lane provides good separation for folks along this stretch of road. More recent type of facility is a median separated or median located cycle track. This case comes out of Baltimore, a streetscape project we're working on. Great in terms of getting folks along the roadway. We didn't do standard bike lanes because this amenity is more of a park-like setting right in the center of the city. The piece we're doing is only a block, but there are plans to do another mile or so that's in planning through the city, actually through Rails to Trails. And then kind of looking at that guidance, going back and talking about the guidelines and how there is flexibility to use them. So we might do a blending of treatments where we have a demand to put in a facility. In this case, we had a one-way road where cyclists were salmoning up the street to get from point A to point B. We needed to introduce a facility that would make that, formalize it, make it safe. So we put in a buffered with flex post cycle track, what we call a contraflow bike lane. And then in the direction coming back towards us in the picture on the right, the cyclists there are sharing the lane. So essentially what we did was took this wide, what used to be a two-way street, and installed a cycle facility in one direction, narrowed the lanes, and put in some traffic calming, so it would be a comfortable place for people to ride if they're a more confident cyclist, and then if they were less confident, they can ride on the sidewalk. Then an emerging facility type that I just wanted to touch on briefly is the protected intersection. We're seeing these pop up around the country. They provide good physical separation for all modes, also might provide signalization. I'm seeing them go in as stop controlled, so very good facility type that this allows us to treat intersections, so then different facility types like trails, on-street facilities can be matched up, and it gives us a lot of flexibility to improve safety where people are crossing the road. Several keys to success I wanted to highlight very briefly for everybody. The first is have a plan. I don't think I could stress that enough. One of the biggest challenges that we see in communities is that the plan is outdated. So even having a plan isn't enough. It's making sure that the plan defines what you want your community to look like. It facilitates incremental implementation of your projects, but one of the big takeaways is it precludes new roadblocks. So people ask a lot about ensuring that a project can be built or constructed. What are the teeth that you have as you're going through development review to make sure that adequate right-of-way is set aside when a development comes through, so you can put these facilities in. If it's on a transportation plan, you have something that says we're going to have a trail here or cycle track, and whatever that is, you've at least identified that it's a need that is your community has demonstrated a need, and then that's something that can be incorporated as part of your plan review process. Another item is funding. Everybody asks about funding, so it's important to recognize opportunities to fund these projects. There are a lot more opportunities, at least currently, to get funding through the government. The FAST Act created it changed some of the old plans or programs, and it also created some new opportunities. The key point that I wanted to highlight here is total project costs. So as you're planning to do a project, you have to include the full cost: planning, engineering, design, construction, and then ongoing maintenance. A lot of times projects only consider the construction cost and leave out the engineering, design, and also nothing set aside for maintenance. So it's really important as these projects move forward to keep that in mind. Another asset that we have is our local advocates. They are our road users. They're the people who are out riding, so it's really important to engage with them, to listen to what they have to say, because they provide some really great input. And also, as we go through public engagement, they tend to be a partner, but they also are really good at generating interest in projects, or helping us refine them and make them a constructible project that meets the needs of the community. Another point that I wanted to bring up, just as planners, we have to think past the typical section. So it's very common when we're looking at facilities that we're going to look at them from the typical section. You need to think about a project in terms of what do things look like when we get to the intersections, and make sure that that's a consideration, because that's where cyclists tend to get squeezed out, like the example I showed down the street from my office. We want to make sure that as a cyclist you can get through that intersection safely, that adequate accommodations provided. And the last thing I'll leave you guys with is remember your audience. So if we're planning these facilities for the top 10% of riders, like we've typically done before, we're going to end up with some sharrows, bike lanes, but if we're going to capture the largest group of interested population, we have to think in terms of separation, making sure that the facilities are safe, that they're connected. So just remember who you're building these facilities for, and that'll help generate a much better product. And with that, I will turn it over for Q&A. Again, thanks to the Berkeley Group for sponsoring today's webinar, and I'm happy to take questions.
Are we finished?
Yes, I am finished.
All right, did you get any questions?
I do not see any questions in the dashboard.
All right, well, if nobody has any questions, we will wrap up. And then, oh, we have a question. What Cassandra Patterson asked, what techniques have you used or seen that influences cities to stray away from sharrows and develop safer, more developed bike infrastructure?
All right, techniques used to stray away from sharrows and develop safer, more developed bike infrastructure. In general, that's a policy, sort of. All right, so Montgomery County is a big client of ours. They recently adopted a policy that their minimum design standard was going to be a cycle track. So the example that I showed from Goldsboro Road, which was the separated bike lane with flex posts, that was originally designed as a bike lane project with sidewalks, and the community, specifically the elected officials, said that facility type was fine before, but it's not good to capture the wider audience that we're trying to reach. So we were actually at the concept design phase on that project, and they had us go through the process of redesigning it to include the physical separation, the buffers, and then the flex posts. So that was really a policy that was decided on by the elected officials, where they said they would approve funding for the project, but they were only going to fund it if we designed it to include the physical separation. In terms of getting away from sharrows, that's more of an issue of just generally accepted best practices. So as we look at research that says who's riding on the roads and what makes them feel safe, people in general have said or just sort of accept that a painted sharrow marking on a road is not enough. There are other considerations that we need to have, like what is the speed on the road, what's the character of traffic on the road, and you know, it used to be accepted that if we painted a sharrow, people would feel like they can ride along that road, and we really understand now that the sharrow isn't a bike facility. It's more of a wayfinding facility, and it may identify that there will be some cyclists out there, but as it turns out, people don't ride just because a sharrow's on the road. They'll ride because the sharrow's there and they feel safe. So it's really been about accepting that that's the case. People are going to go out and ride on facilities where they feel safe.
Okay, you have a couple more, Nathan. Do you see them in your question box, or do you want me to pull them up for you?
I see them. I'm just trying to get it to pop out.
So I have one from, I'll go ahead and read this.
That'd be helpful.
Okay, Mike Martin asks, at what intersection LOS degradation do you have to get no build for that section of bike lanes?
I don't really look at things in terms of a level of service from a no-build perspective. So I assume the question means that folks are, that we have an adequate level of service to remove a lane and put that turning volume into another lane. In general, we see a lot of apprehension to removing turn lanes and providing dedicated facilities. I had an example that I didn't show where we actually were told to include a turn lane despite the fact that it didn't have any demonstrated level of service benefit or capacity benefit at an intersection. Traffic engineers still look at existing facilities and say there's an existing turn lane, we need to maintain it, or there's an existing travel lane, we need to maintain it. So that's a hurdle that we're working through, trying to improve quality of service for our bicycle users and balancing out those needs of our vehicle users. It's something we're still working out.
All right, your next question is from Ian Pike. Any recommendations for difficult topography such as mountainous or hilly areas?
Well, yeah. We follow the ADA guidelines that facilities may match the road grade. So in terms of design, we have to accept that whatever the road grade is, that's our maximum grade. We do try to achieve ADA grades wherever possible, so that might include some switchbacks or extending the alignment, taking advantage of terrain to try and achieve a 5% maximum grade. So it's really a matter of, do we have the ability to make those facilities work to achieve ADA, or are we stuck just putting in a facility that parallels the road? But if a trail or a cycle facility is serving a transportation function, we do ensure that it either matches road grade or it's 5%. And we've done that on a handful of projects that, it does create some challenges, especially where the mountainous terrain that we're referring to is maybe 10 to 15%. So there are definitely some challenges to try and work out that grade on a bike design project.
All right, and then the last one I have you had success with Rails to Trails financing and maintenance agreement development?
I have not. So no, I can't answer that question.
All right, those are all the questions I have. And Nathan, your contact information is listed here if anybody wants to get in touch with you. And like I said, all of these webinars are posted to our YouTube page, which is down in your chat box in the dashboard. If anybody has any questions in general, they can send questions to admin@apavirginia.com. Again, admin, ADMIN @apavirginia.com. We thank you guys again. Thank you to the Berkeley Group for being a sponsor. We look forward to seeing everybody in February. And thank you again, Nathan, for presenting on bicycle and pedestrian planning.
Thanks everybody for attending.
Have a good afternoon.